Whether by land, sea, or air, military dominance is always won by command of the highest ground. The Space Force Association works with industry partners to examine what's in the art of the possible for future capabilities. The SFA provides an opportunity to research, inform, and advocate for a strong Space Force. Show your support by signing up today at ussfa.org.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Spacepower podcast. I'm your host, Bill Wolf, the president and founder of the Space Force Association, and I am more than honored to have my good friend, Lieutenant General Mike Lutton, the Deputy Commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, with us today to talk about not just all the great work that they're doing down there at Air Force Global Strike Command, but how space is so critical to their mission and the relationship that's being established between Air Force Global Strike and the Space Force. General, thanks so much for being with us today.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Bill.
And sir, again, it's an honor, and your career path really looks like a geopolitical choose your own adventure book. But instead of battling aliens, you're teaching space weapons officers, wrangling satellites and strategic bombers. So let's dive into that fascinating journey that has brought you to this point.
Yeah.
So let's start with the teaching space weapons officers. Of course, the best class to go through the weapons school was 01 Bravo. I think everyone can attest to that. But talk
The
about
best of my first class.
but really, a lot of people, when they hear space operations, it still conjures up images of Star Wars or perhaps Apollo 13.
Yeah.
But your resume tells a much more grounded or ungrounded story. Can you take us all the way back to the early days in space operations? And what was the biggest aha moment that made you think, yep, this is going to be a critical domain in the future?
Well, what was interesting is, and you will likely remember it, and maybe some of the listeners and viewers, but there used to be an organization called the Space Warfare Center. And this is when I was an ICBM operator in 95. And they had the Space Tactics Instructor course, which was really the precursor to the Space Division, which was the precursor to the 328th Weapons Squadron. And they needed an ICBM instructor to come down to give a lesson. And either my ops group commander or my chief of Standoval was like, hey, do you want to go down there? And I was interested even then, and that was spring of 95. And so I went down there and taught that class on ICBM operations, and don't have too many memories other than, hey, I thought the mission was really interesting and I enjoy instruction. And at that time, our community had 5 career fields that you could go into, right? The 13S3, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. And so I transitioned from ICBM operations to satellite command and control at Force Ops. Back then used to be called Falcon Air Force Station, and then since renamed Schriever. And I went to the weapons school in 98 Alpha out of Falcon, or Schriever Air Force Base.
And how did that change your perspective? I remember going there, and I didn't really understand, because a lot of what happened back then when they were starting space operations in the Air Force, we remember they kind of opened the floodgates to missileers. And so a lot of us missileers, we went through the floodgates looking for, hey, what is this new space operations all about? So what was your biggest kind of moment where you said, this is really important what these guys are talking about, and obviously the instruction is what's going to be so critical?
Well, I think for me, the real eye-opening experience is about 27 years ago when I signed in over in Europe as a weapons officer, and that was my first assignment right after I graduated in June of 98. And there were issues going on in the Balkans, uh, you know, literally had to find the map that goes, here's where Kosovo is at. Obviously knew where Yugoslavia was at, but where Kosovo is at, and several of the other countries. And then several months later, almost 5, 6 months later, support and combat operations in Serbia and against a Serbian Operation Allied Force. And, that was 99. So just math in public 26 years ago. And now you think of it, you don't even think of it. But first time B-2 was used in combat. First time GPS-aided munitions were used in combat. So very interesting. And the learning curve was very steep on space integration. And Shark Cologne was there. He was really instrumental in the efforts forward. Zena, Kate Zeitler was there before Shark and I, and just a lot of firsthand experience to see what worked on the integration side and then see what didn't work on the integration side. I would tell you two things happened from that. One, very fortunate to be able to go back to the weapons school to instruct. But then, even then, in 01, within the cadre and within, I would say, even the students that are going through, there's still this focus on, hey, our domain is going to be different. So there's an integration piece you have to factor in, and there's an integration piece you have to be focused on. But then there's this is 25 years ago, we're talking around the station that the fight is going to go into orbit, right? That is the discussion among the captains and the majors. And, 9/11 occurs. Rhino Sheehan is downrange. Ramrod is the first one to deploy out of the division because we were still a division at that point. And then it's just, we'd kept that integration up. And that integration then you saw it come full swing back to the weapons school, where the weapons school now has grads that have deployed, that have integrated with space, counter space, in theater, that are now back instructing again. And you just get this, the RPM just picks up on the integration, for sure.
Yes, sir. It's so fascinating that you talk about the integrated ops environment that the space domain basically allows.
Mm-hmm.
And back then we talked about space as a benign environment, meaning it was
Right.
just a domain that we would send information through and get information from, but we never thought of it as a warfighting domain until recently, where now we're able to talk about space as a warfighting domain. So what's been the most exciting technological leap that you've seen that's really changed the game?
I look at it, it's not original to me. There's a senior officer's name was I.B. Holly, and he talks about organization, thought, and technology. And from a policy perspective, when you free people to think about how they're going to employ capability that maybe in the past was policy constrained or policy guided very closely by policy and national level policy, and likely for good reason at the time. But conditions change, right? Conditions change. And you see that arc of discussion from General Kaler to General Raymond about space being contested, congested. General Lord is very much in that discussion. General Chilton is very much in that discussion. So you have your thought changing, and now there is more than just a catalyst. There's an imperative. And then the thought drives the technology, and then the thought and technology drive what the organization should really look like, which has been an exciting part to see the Space Force and the Guardians and see where they've taken it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you were part of the initial cadre to start having, or another way to say it is start empowering the youth of the community to have a discussion in describing the future that they know they needed. So
Yeah.
that's what I think you helped pave the way for as one of the first instructors, first grads and then first instructors there at the weapons school is, hey, the youth get a vote. The future gets a vote in how they want to interact with the domain. And no more important imperative was being able to interact with this future warfighting domain that everyone was coming to terms with, which back in the day, you talked about it. Hey, we were at war in space, and I remember I had did interviews with General McCory as well, and people are like, "Hey, what do you mean we do have war in space?" And it's like, well, we've been fighting in the domain for a long time. Let's not
Right.
mistake the fact or misperceive the fact that this has been a warfighting domain for years. It's just not been very well publicized, and now we can really talk about the fact that it's a national imperative to ensure freedom of action and domain, just like we do in every other domain, just like you do for the air domain currently.
For sure. Yeah. And kind of anchoring back on that organization, thought, and technology, one of the things that I look back on and super proud of the team in the 328th, because I had the unbelievable honor to go back and be the weapons squadron commander from '07 to '09. And those that have instructed there realize that that is both an honor and quite a lot of work. But it was the team pivoting between the 7 Bravo and the 8 Alpha class to really focus and literally redefine it as the Space Superiority Weapons Instructor course. Because I would tell you, having been a part of that team across the arc from '98 to '07, it was largely unchanged in 9 to 10 years and risk lagging behind the threat. Because by '07, China is well on their way.
Yeah, you bring up a good point that I think is a good segue into discussing. Let's just talk about how threat drives everything. And that was really instilled in me when you were instructing me back in '01. Is everything starts with a threat. So from your perspective, and now we've got two perspectives. One is the space, the threats in the space domain, but now we can pivot towards threats from the other domain and what you did just most recently and what your team did most recently. But let's start with the space threats. Talk a little bit
Sure.
about that.
Yeah, one of the documents that I go to routinely, in particular for the unclassified environment, is there's a congressional requirement for the Department of Defense to report on Chinese military. And the team can get you the link for that. It's published. It's an completely unclassified document, and you can look at it from the beginning of the first report until the most current report. And it's not linear. Like, if it is linear, it's a vertical line. What is interesting, and I had the opportunity when I was a student at Naval War College to write on it. It's a very methodical, thought out, engineered game plan by the Chinese Communist Party. Very much so. And the data in the unclassified report shows that. They see, and the Chinese Communist Party writes about it, right? They see the advantage that our force is provided by having space superiority and being able to move and maneuver and operate in the space domain at a time and place of our choosing. And I don't particularly like this word, and I don't like this word associated with guardians because it undermines what they bring to the drum. Space doesn't enable anything. Enabler is not the proper term for what guardians bring to the fight. Guardians bring decisive capabilities to joint and coalition operations. That they're not enablers, and they shouldn't think of themselves as enablers. They're decisive teammates in a joint or coalition fight. Try doing it without them. Just try it. In fact, you may remember some of the early discussions of Day Without Space. Remember that era?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And as most things are, they're solved in the station. And I can't remember the instructor who brought it up. He's like, yeah, we had a day without space. It was in 1965, and nobody liked it. And we didn't have free maneuver. We didn't have these capabilities. He rattled off a bunch of But yeah, I just wanted to underscore that point. If there's a Guardian out there, brand new team member, officer enlisted, you're not an enabler. You're a critical, valued member of the joint team.
Awesome, General. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it brings up, I remember I was out at Ulti Focus or Ulti Freedom Guardian, one of the South Korean exercises. And I was back in the skiff, and I look around, and we had all the cell chiefs from the AOC. And I asked a simple question at that point, and it was funny that there was a pause, but I simply said, is space part of the minimum force package? Yes or no?
Right.
And they kind of looked around, and they didn't know how to respond. And they go, yes, like with a question. Absolutely it is. And
Right.
if you're not thinking about space from the onset, then we're missing a pretty critical part of mission planning and obviously in execution. Sir, let me pivot quickly to the Global Strike Command and what's happening, and your years of space expertise, and how those years of space expertise help inform your approach to deterrence and global power projection. Are you constantly thinking, how can a satellite make this bomber better? Or kind of like what you just said, it's critical that space is integrated into the entire infrastructure of Global Strike Command.
Yeah, I think from our air component perspective, we don't want to fight fair, right? We want to be, like I said, decisive. So that's having all of our joint teammates, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians, and what they bring to the table. And in particular, it could be enhanced accuracy for weapons for long-range strike with our bomber force. It could be defense of our networks or links by defensive space capabilities as we do global operations. And it can be other capabilities that are integrated with a theater fight. I think those are the particular things that I tend to focus on. And now in the position I am in, it's supporting General Bussier as the air component commander and going, okay, what are the questions that we need to be asking? And then if it's working with General Miller or General Chess or one of the theater Space Force components, then that's who we partner with. When Chris Putman was at CENTCOM, quite a bit of work, quite a bit of comms with him as well. And like I said, Doug Chess, routinely talking with Doug.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I suspect, and we talked about this obviously way back when, but those plans that are on the shelf, and we talk about Annex C and Annex S, and now it's got to be, what are your thoughts? We have to have space integrated throughout, and there's space plans that support air, and there's air plans that support space.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk just a little bit about how you work through that planning cycle, that planning process that might not have been so understandable back in the day, but now you have to really inject it into the planning process and have those readily prepared plans on the shelf to reference?
Yeah, the way I would break that down is the team does the deliberate planning with regional combatant commanders and regional air components, right? One commonality between Global Strike and Mobility Command and Special Forces and space is our perspective is global. Space obviously has a global perspective looking down, but also looking up and around, which is unique, I think, to space. From a global strike perspective, as the name indicates, we have a global perspective. So it's just not EUCOM today, it's EUCOM today and INDOPACOM today and Central Command today and AFRICOM and then NORTHCOM, right? And so they're all those things simultaneously in the deliberate space. And then we have the ability to conduct immediate response if required. And that immediate response can be either conventional or, if directed, nuclear. And so there are things that we work directly with our combatant command, United States Strategic Command, that obviously integrate the full range of space capabilities across the joint fight for both conventional and nuclear deterrence.
Thank you, sir. You know, Global Strike is often seen as the ultimate no-fail mission. How do you as a leader balance the constant need for readiness and the integration of cutting-edge technology, especially when some of that tech might literally be light years ahead of yesterday's capabilities?
Yeah, so I'd look at it two ways. The first way I'd look at it is really focusing it for the audience, I would imagine largely on Guardians. For me, focusing on airmen and how you develop those airmen and how you make sure that their development, their experiences not only prepare them for the next fight, but anticipate future fights. The other piece of it is when we talk to them, being very mindful of how we discuss things as senior leaders. An example, in your travels, you can listen for this and your audience can listen for this. How many times do you hear risk? Like the word risk. So it's gotten to the point with me where I almost believe it's negative development because we don't discuss the other side of that coin, which is payoff. And so we could have a capability on the space side that we either want to put on orbit or have an effect on orbit or have an effect somewhere. And someone may frame that in policy risk. Someone may frame that in technological risk. Just make sure that payoff is a part of that discussion as well, right? And as we're growing young Guardians, they understand to ask that question as well, is what's the payoff to the joint force? What's the payoff to the nation of feeling that capability? What's the payoff to the joint force? What's the payoff to the nation on modification of that policy to fit this specific circumstance if that's required? I think that's really it for me. And then really look at how you support them, whether they're airmen or guardians, so they can deliver.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Let's talk about the intersection of space and deterrence. In your view, what role does space play in ensuring the credibility and effectiveness of the strategic forces under your command?
Yeah, I think there's the classic aspects that space brings to the joint fight and contributes to deterrence. Whether it's warning, whether it's communications, whether it's command and control, whether it's sensing, those things I think are classic. The interesting part now for me is the actual deterrent value space forces have. So when we look at the aggregate of those capabilities, what does that present to an adversary?
Right.
There's clearly a nuclear aspect, as you and the audience are aware of, that presents the highest bar to a potential adversary for action against the United States or one of our allies. But then you look at a well-developed, fielded space force, whether that's on the ground or in orbit, and you look at it and you go, what dilemmas does that provide to a potential adversary? And when potential adversaries look at those dilemmas, they realize that the risk of action is not worth it. That in and of itself provides deterrent value. So I think that's the exciting part with space capability now is it produces, it has always produced, but we're talking more about the deterrent capability that the Space Force provides to the joint fight and the nation.
Thank you, sir. You talk about deterrence, and of course, part of that is decisiveness. Speaking of decisiveness, I think many people appreciated the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff coming online and talking specifics about Operation Midnight Hammer. It was probably the first time I'd ever seen, not just in my career, but in my lifetime, where the chairman got up and actually briefed out the operation. So let's talk a little bit about Operation Midnight Hammer and how that's an example of an entire force package structure coming together with decisiveness and capabilities to deliver a national security objective.
Yeah, unfortunately for the audience, I won't be able to talk much about that specific operation, but I would underscore the points that you made. I mean, the part that really, when you look at it from a military perspective, and just no other way to describe it other than just pride in the team for what they executed, was the level of execution and the level of integration. And you and I have both been fortunate enough to be a part of some pretty unique teams. And I don't know that there's anything more satisfying or humbling when you see a joint team execute at a high level.
Yes, sir.
And that's across the board. Yeah.
And speaking of which, I mean, and I understand and I appreciate the fact that you can't go into the specifics. And again, General Kane did a great job, I think, summarizing the activities and being very explicit about what was executed. Let's talk about the criticality of training and creating a realistic training environment for all of your crews. And I remember being on crew as a missileer and how critical training was in a realistic training environment to prepare. So just briefly talk about that and then juxtapose against what the Space Force is probably working on today.
Yeah, for me, realistic training is a responsibility of a commander and a leader, right? As a commander in the Space Force of a Delta, you've been given a mission with tasks, and you're required to train and develop your team so you can execute that mission and accomplish those tasks. It's incumbent upon a commander and a leader to make sure that that environment exists. And you don't show up in game day and you haven't done the proper training, the proper mission rehearsal. And so we get back to that original point about where you have this intersection of organization, thought, and technology. And now, if I have a new piece of gear, do I really want to be constrained by old thinking and old methods of training? Or are there new ways that I can look at training? And if, I would look at force ops that I was in, some pretty unique ways to do training that have clearly grown. Now you can actually use, and it's pretty common that you can actually use VR. I think where you want to be as a leader and commander is really being able to assess where your team is at in their preparation, and then having the data that goes, yeah, we're ready to now go into joint training. And don't be satisfied just with intra Delta or intra organization training. It's how do you take that on the road? How do you integrate in a space flag, or how do you integrate in Guardian, multi-Guardian, multi-Delta level training events? And then again, having the objective data to go, this is how we did, and this is how we can be better. I think when you combine that, it's pretty exciting.
Yes, sir. I agree 100%. And what the Air Force learned years ago was the criticality of presenting real world training environments and simulators uh, that were delivered with the system itself. So the
Right.
Air Force knew not to take the system, not to take delivery of the system until there were, no kidding, real world simulators and trainers. And that's, I think, a real critical point is we got to ensure the Guardians have the capabilities they need, just like you have the capabilities you need to continue to execute and do your advanced training in Global Strike Command.
Yeah, and one that I would add, and I think it particularly hit home with me probably about 4 months ago. I got to fly with the 340th Weapons Squadron, the Buffs, and we were doing a standoff attack mission, and there were a lot of foci of that mission, but the most important one was timing and weapons release and how it related to weapons impact. And so the distillation of why you're actually doing the training is critical. Like, what are the desired learning objectives? And do you have that environment set such that you can achieve those objectives? And more importantly, assess the achievement of those objectives.
Yeah, really good point, General. Thank you.
Yeah.
As we close out here, General, I know you're running out of time, but what keeps you up at night and what is on the future for Air Force Global Strike Command? You mentioned VR. So is that something you're actively looking at in terms of training, integration? What are some of the tech you're looking at, or how are you approaching some of the challenges differently?
I think we have integrated VR. There's some examples of it where we have done that with our air-to-air refueling that allow us to look at certain aspects in training. Probably the one that is most interesting to me is some of the physiological work we've done and that we're gonna do. So this is both physical as well as performance based. And we've integrated that into our formal training units. And we're going to integrate that across our bomber, helo, and ICBM forces. And it's really just an investment in our airmen, largely because of some of the duration sorties that we're flying. But we also know it's going to be a more complex environment that they're going to operate in. So we want them to be physically and mentally prepared. As far as what keeps me up, uh, you know, I don't really get concerned about things that keep me up. Um, uh, I think it's really focused on where is the team at? How do you make sure you're doing what you need to do to support the team and their families and getting them even more prepared for uncertainty? The bomber force, the ICBM force, the helo team has been very busy. The nation, rightfully so, expects a lot out of them. And so getting them ready and being a part of a team that gets them ready and supporting them in the field has been an exciting opportunity for me.
General, thanks so much for your time. Any closing comments from you, sir?
No, appreciate what you and the team are doing there, and just continue to cheer from the sidelines for the Guardians. They're crushing it. And I was just at the 328th in June, and I saw the sign where they had the 447th graduate. So as grad 31, that was a couple days ago. So it's long time ago. Howie Stearns and I had conversations. Pete Stearns goes by Howie, since retired. Had conversations about where we thought the division would go and where we thought the squadron would go, and they've taken it so much farther. It's great to see the enlisted force is even way more integrated because you all fight together, which is why we bought FJ and Sergeant Davis out there so many years ago, integrating them in at the beginning because we fight as a team, officer and enlisted. So yeah, just super proud of the team, super proud of the 328th.
Yeah, seriously, sir. And you were a plank holder there, helped set the culture and the foundation. Thanks for your leadership then, and thanks for your continued leadership there at Air Force Global Strike Command. Sir, thanks so much for taking time. Really do appreciate your time today. Have a great Air Force Day. Until next time, talk soon.
Yeah.
Bye now.
All right. Take care.
Whether by land, sea, or air, military dominance is always won by command of the highest ground. The Space Force Association works with industry partners to examine what's in the art of the possible for future capabilities. The SFA provides an opportunity to research, inform, and advocate for a strong Space Force. Show your support by signing up today at ussfa.org.